is Robert Picardo, the holographic doctor from Star Trek Voyager, and Commander Woolsey from Stargate Atlantis. You're listening to Mike the Birdman Dodd and the rest of the Twig crew on This Week in Geek.net.
And now it's time for another special feature.
Pickle.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to Twig, otherwise known as This Week in Geek, and I'm your host, Mike the Birdman Dodd, and yes, we are once again enjoying this unintentional vacation, such as it may be, though for some of you it is not. It is what it is. This is our new way of life right now, and that's okay, but that means you have more time to listen to podcasts, so hopefully you're taking advantage of this time to learn about some of your favorite hobbies and pastimes. And what that means is over the last little bit, I have been talking with some wonderful people who've been involved in documentaries, people who've been involved in the role-playing game industry, and that trend continues today. We've actually been talking with this gentleman for quite some time. We've had him involved on Altered Geek. We've had him in Future Imperfect. And I've actually known this guy for a lot longer than that, and we've really become close over the past few months while watching Star Trek Picard, the train wreck that was. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about freelance writer, contributor, and all-around good guy, Aaron Pollyea, and he has written for Star Trek Adventures for Modifius. He's written for BattleTech by Catalyst Game Labs, and some other things I probably don't know about. So we are going to welcome Aaron back to the show, this time as a guest.
Hi,
Welcome.
How's it going, everybody?
It is going rather well today, enjoying yet another day in quarantined paradise, such as it may be.
Oh, yeah, I know how it is.
So it's different to have you on this side of the microphone, because most of the time we have you contributing as one of us, as one of our peers, but now we're putting you on the spot and kind of getting into your head, because we did tease on Future Imperfect we would have you on as a guest, and guess what? Today is that day.
All right.
So I guess let's go back to the very beginning, which I don't know where it really begins with you. So you've mentioned that you've been a freelance writer and contributor, but obviously every story has a beginning and it's got to start somewhere. So how did you even get into writing or have an interest in RPGs? Because I know it's not something every kid necessarily picks up.
Well, I think I started back in middle school, really. Maybe a bit earlier than that, actually, now that I think about now that I said that. I think I started playing BattleTech specifically as my first game back right after it first came out, like in the mid-'80s.
Wow.
So I was there from like almost day one, not quite, because I didn't play it when it was still Battle Droids. It was right after Battle Droids was gone. So 86, 87, something like that. And then I soon after got into RPGs, and most people's kind of entry drug to that is Dungeons and Dragons. The reason I got into it was because I had been a science fiction kid since as far back as I can remember. I grew up watching Star Trek on a little TV every day. Some of my first memories are actually of Star Trek. So obviously I love science fiction, and science fiction games got me into gaming. And then I branched out when I found friends that liked Dungeons and Dragons, and I wanted to try that. And then it just kind of blew up from there.
So what were some of the other games that maybe you were kind of playing? Because I didn't really get into the RPG world until the mid-'90s, and I had no idea there was anything beyond D&D. I was very surprised when I discovered Shadowrun around 96.
Yeah, I played Shadowrun, not often, but I did. I want to say that I toyed around with Rifts. I wasn't ever happy with the actual nuts and bolts of that system, but I liked the setting, so I toyed around with that. Crimson Skies, which was a FASA thing, I played. Shadowrun, I said. Yeah, I guess I didn't branch out much from Dungeons and Dragons and BattleTech primarily, but I did.
So as you kind of grew up and started getting into high school and much kind of later on in life, what kind of made you decide that you wanted to pursue something in this endeavor? Or basically, like, what was your professional career kind of leading into RPGs? Because I know not everybody has necessarily the same career trajectory.
Well, I didn't actually even think about writing for RPGs until I had already graduated college. I'd always played around with writing little pieces to add into games because I thought something was missing or something was something just needed to change, right? But yeah, I don't think I really got into submitting anything to game designers up until, let's say, 2008. So yeah, I had already graduated. And believe it or not, my first entry in writing or any kind of game system wasn't actually rules or writing, it was art. My first product that I wrote was, had anything to do with was BattleTech 25 Years of Art and Fiction. And I had actually been sending FanPro, was it FanPro at the time? Boy, that's a while back, so I can't remember.
The guys who did Mech Warrior Dark Ages, right?
Yeah, it was either Catalyst just barely, or it was still FanPro. I sent in a whole bunch of art of planets because I had been tinkering in my spare time for our local BattleTech game, making 3D models of every planet in the inner sphere. I was kind of crazy, right? But I had all these maps for planets made and star system data generated, populations and all that. And I had written effectively what was like 500 to 600 pages worth of information for the inner sphere. It was kind of excessive, but I mean, all right, fair enough. I had an idea and I went with it. And then I sent all this information into Randall Bills, and he sent it to Herb Bees, who was the line developer at the time. He goes, hey, okay, this guy has a lot of information. Can we use it for something? And they said, yeah, we need a whole bunch of art for planets in this book. Does he have like data for these planets? Well, yeah, get him to do it. So my first entries were these planetary pieces of data and pictures that were in that book that started every chapter. And then from there, because the line developer saw that I actually had a lot of energy and drive to contribute, I got hired to co-write Air Report 2750, which was a Star League era book for those of you that know BattleTech. And about a month into the project, the other writer had to nearly drop out. And so I took up all the slack and ended up writing the vast majority of that book. I think I remember saying that everything about after page 30 in that book is mine, like whole cloth. And then it just kept going from there. I've written a lot of stuff for BattleTech from there, and it just got me into it. But outside of that, I had always been writing just general things to add into games, or if I didn't think that there was a good rule set for an idea that I had, well, let's start playing with some ideas and put together a rule set to make a game and see if it works.
Okay, so obviously being a huge fan and being enthusiastic about a property can definitely get you in the door. What was it about BattleTech that kept your interest all these years?
I liked that it was a fairly simple game that could become a lot more complex depending on how you wanted to play it and how far you wanted to go into it. I liked the idea that there were these thousands of planets. I liked the idea that there were lots of different like alien life forms, maybe not intelligent, of course, in BattleTech. We can talk about the BattleTech novel that has intelligent aliens in it separately. But
what?
But I really enjoyed the idea of big giant stompy robots as well. So it just kept my interest. Fun to play.
It's always been one of those universes I've always had a huge fandom in, but I've only ever played the role-playing game a few times, which I will admit, the role-playing game rules I'm not a huge fan of, but I like the tactical board game, which is tremendously fun. A little bit of personal history with me. I used to use the computer game, which you can hear a mech outside my house right now. Sorry. I used to play the MechWarrior 3 game on Windows 98, and it was so close to the rule set for BattleTech, I think it was 2nd edition, that was out at that time. You could field test mechs in that game, use them in the tabletop game, and they would work. And
the construction rules were the same.
Yeah, exactly. It was amazing. So my strategy was to use 7 ER medium pulse lasers, which could strip the armor off of almost any limb of a mech, as long as I wasn't shooting center torso. I could seriously take you out in like probably 1 alpha strike. Which, for those of you that don't know, the alpha strike term in BattleTech means you fire all your weapons at once without using coolant. So I could strip it off. If I had a targeting computer, it was even better. My other friend built a mech that I think was something like 7 ER medium lasers, which he could chain fire those, and it was also brutally effective at medium to short range. So, yeah, BattleTech has just always been one of those fascinating universes because, as you mentioned, it's as complex or as simple as you want to make it, and it's been adapted into a number of different properties such as video games, novels, Toon, which is an underappreciated series, which I hope will somehow get released. Probably not, though, on Blu-ray someday. And it's been a property that has recently come back with like MechWarrior 5 Mercenaries getting released by, I think it was Piranha Games last year. Harebrained Schemes the year before last had their own BattleTech game. So it's an exciting universe to get involved in. Just knowing that you are so passionate about it kind of gives me that connection to it. So if I ever need to know a question about House Kurita, House Steiner, how do the clans work? Because I'm a big clan guy. My God, I love the clans.
Well, okay, I will say I am not a clan guy. I've written for the clans, but I do not like the clans, mainly because I despise their philosophy. But I have written for them. I've written some very direct stuff, like the entire section for the Second Combine Dominion War that was in Brush Wars, I think, the book. And I had to write the Nova Cats and the Ghost Bears in that, as well as the Combine. But I mean, yeah, I've done it. I can do it. I just generally don't like the clans.
Now, for those of the people in our audience that don't necessarily know what the hell we're talking about, can you sum up the clan wars in about 30 seconds to 45?
Oh, okay, I can try. Well, the clans are actually another part of humanity that split off from the rest of it. Originally, they had these high ideals about the utopian kind of aspects of the Star League, which was when all of humanity was under one banner. They fell away from that kind of ideal and became a Spartan fascist-like society with caste systems. So and heavy eugenics. So you would be bred into your supposed job, and if you weren't good enough, you were tossed out and reduced to doing something that you were never meant to do. So when the clans decided to come back to the Inner Sphere and reunite humanity under their idea of a Star League, which was very different then from what the Star League was, they came in and just started beating the hell out of the rest of the Inner Sphere, because the rest of the Inner Sphere had been beating the hell out of themselves for about 200 years and had made their technological base a lot lower. They had bombed themselves back into the 21st century, let's say.
That's something that I've always liked about BattleTech. The fact that the cost of war is costing them their technologies. Like, they may have one of the mechs that's used in BattleTech might be something that's known as an Atlas, which is 100-ton war machine, or an Annihilator, another 100-ton, which is great and cool, which would be a great frontline unit to use in a war. But if you don't have the parts to fix it or the know-how, you're kind of screwed. And that's something I've never seen any other fiction do. As you mentioned, they bomb themselves back to the 21st century. They have all these advanced weaponries, but unless they find a cache of a lost Star League data core or they salvage some clan tech, even then they don't know how to use it. I've never seen any other fictional universe do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you've also written other things. I mean, obviously science fiction seems to be your bag, so to speak. So a couple of years ago, Modifius, which is another publisher based out of the UK, had gotten licensed to a property that's been bounced around from Fossa to Decipher to Last Unicorn, and finally landed with them. And that is the Star Trek license, which is the place we all hope we'll eventually get to someday. But you know what? I'll take a replicator and a holodeck and a selection of holo novels. What kind? I'm not. To which kind? I'll leave up to your imagination. But the point is, Star Trek was back in a pretty big way, and it was under a new rule system known as the 2D20 system. So exciting times. There were a bunch of new source books available for it, which have covered the Alpha Quadrant to the most latest, which is the Delta Quadrant. And I'd like to know, Aaron, where do you fit in writing Star Trek rules, and what was your contribution to the Star Trek system overall?
My general contribution to the game is anything that is ship based. I've generally written all of the ships. I've written all the shuttles. I've written quite a bit of at least in the core book, I've written quite a bit of the stuff that deals with planets, stars, spatial phenomenon, technology, Zen and the Art of Warp Core maintenance, that kind of thing. But I've also written adventures. So my normal kind of chunky technology, science-y type stuff that I normally do, I can generally put that into an adventure and write an interesting story, at least I hope interesting story around that. So that's what I do for Star Trek adventures in general.
So just listening to this interview over the course of us doing, you seem to have a pretty big interest in space and science. Like, how deep does that interest go? Because I have a feeling we're probably kindred spirits in that regard. So I'm just curious, how big of a space nerd are you?
I'm a pretty big space nerd. I don't think I'm the biggest out there, but my love for astronomy went back to when I was a kid. So growing up, I always wanted to be an astronomer. And after getting to college, that still never even changed. I went to school for astrophysics. But it turns out that unless you're like the top 5% of your class, you're generally not going to get a job at NASA. So I'm like, you know what? I'm not in the top 5% of my class. I'll change my major and just graduate instantly. So I don't have an astrophysics degree. I have an earth science degree for my undergrad. Ooh. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I have a telescope that I take out all the time. I have subscriptions to, astronomy magazines and whatnot. It's like one of my two big hobbies, I would say.
What are some of the most interesting things you've been able to integrate from your love of astronomy and science in the Star Trek? Because obviously in Star Trek, they talk about all these spatial phenomena, and during the time the show was written primarily in the 80s and into the 90s, some of that wasn't necessarily well understood. And now with the science being the way it is, that knowledge has changed. Have you been able to bring any of those cool new advances in the science into Star Trek?
Some of it. A lot of the problem with the original series was that it's from the 60s, so we didn't have a larger understanding of the universe. And, not that I'm saying that we have a perfect understanding now, but like how planets kind of evolve around stars. The idea of kind of a class M planet might be too broad for what is habitable. And then you see Star Trek trying to deal with that by saying, oh, well, class L planets are habitable too. They just don't have X, Y, or Z. You don't really see in some of the older stuff, you don't see these hot Jupiters either that are a part of the classification. Now, some writers have been trying to put that in. I do believe that there's mentions of them in Star Trek Adventures. But yeah, you have to kind of put stuff in. And when I write like about black holes or nebula or white dwarfs. It's you take the science that's out there, try not to write anything too wacky about it in there that is science fiction-y, and leave as much vague as possible for both the game master to use as a way around you not knowing everything. Like, hey, 2 years from now, we might discover something else, and you don't want your writing to be completely wrong or wacky. You want them to be able to adjust to whatever's there now.
Now, what has been one of the most exciting things for you as a hobbyist, just to kind of steer back into that for just a second? What has been one of the most exciting things that you've learned in astronomy in the last couple of years? I think for me, I have a very big fascination with gamma ray bursts and Wolf ray at stars ever since I learned about the quote-unquote cosmic sniper rifle potentially aimed at Earth, which it's not supposedly going to happen, but it has worried me awake at night once or twice.
Those are kind of like about two neutron stars smacking together, and you get this big gamma ray burst. That's the theory of how it's done, and they do happen, but it's thankfully a fairly rare event.
Yeah. What is your favorite advance, or what's the phenomena that you find yourself reading or just learning the most about?
I really like just reading about new planets being discovered. That it's as simple as that. I love the idea of just strange new worlds. Be it, a possibly habitable planet around, TRAPPIST-1, and there's, oh my God, there might be 5 possible habitable planets around that star. How would that look? How would life be on that world? How would they all be interconnected because of maybe panspermia across that system? I love reading that kind of stuff and then thinking about how it could apply to science fiction ideas. I don't know. That's probably the best answer I can give. I mean, I absorb all of astronomy kind of news, and it all makes me smile, but I enjoy the most planets, just new stuff about planets.
All right. So going back to Star Trek, back to the world of fiction yet again, while you were writing for the line, and presumably you still are, though I'm pretty sure you can't talk about it, what is some of the things that you've really enjoyed developing? Because you did mention some ships, and Star Trek has always had this really rich history of developing ships that you see on screen. Sometimes you'll see things hidden in there as just like a blink and you'll miss it. Like, I'm pretty sure in Star Trek First Contact, you see an Akira class or a steam runner.
There's steamers and Akiras in that battle, yeah.
Yeah, so what are some of the things that maybe you've had a chance to create or work on or give life to that have been really special to you?
I liked working on the ships of the Federation in Gamma Quadrant specifically that were like the hero ships, and trying to give them a little bit of a history and flair that made them their own vessels, if you know what I mean. Like, these are ships that have had stories just like Enterprise on screen in Next Generation, but they haven't had quite the same experiences, obviously. So they've gone and had different crews and different adventures. How can we flesh that out and try to do it in less than 500 words? That was an interesting challenge, and I loved doing it. For USS Sutherland, which was a Nebula class, it was a ship that was mentioned quite a few times in Deep Space Nine, but never shown. And Dax would often talk about how Sutherland was coming in, and those guys were party guys when they would come in. So I tried to come up with ideas of why Dax would love to see these people coming in, what kind of partying that they would do. So I turned Sutherland into this kind of hard-fighting starship during the war that would blow off steam when it came back into port, and that they slowly adapted their ship to have a kind of South Pacific tiki feel, where, like the plants that you always see in the corridors, even on a Galaxy, they're tropical plants, or maybe off-duty. They still have uniforms, but they might have tropical print, or maybe 10 Forward is set up like a hollow beach.
I mean, just to think that you can give that much life and flair to something in less than 500 characters, that's something quite special. And that's one of the things I really enjoy about RPGs, especially when you're giving what I like to call fluff to little things like that. It's flair, and that's something that I think a lot of games, if they're written particularly well, do something incredibly special. Like one of the things I remember specifically, it's not Star Trek related, but in Shadowrun, for example, you'd buy the Street Samurai catalog or Fields of Fire or whatever, and it would talk about a gun, and you'd get some people talking about it, and you just get a feel for the weapon, whereas you've been able to capture the ship, give it life that a game master who's really clever can really sink his or her teeth into. And maybe if you're running a Gamma Quadrant campaign, guess what? Maybe it's not the Defiant you're on. Maybe it's the Sutherland. That's really kind of neat. That's kind of exciting to think for game masters out there to have these possibilities for their own Star Trek adventures games.
It just makes it an example for game masters to go, man, I really want to put in an MPC ship, but I want to have it be its own ship. What can I do? Well, here's 5 examples of ships that are there for you to look at and see what you could do. You know, you don't have to copy one of the ships, but you know, man, I really like the idea of maybe a ship that has had, you know, a lot of difficulty with away missions. So their away mission teams are more Mako-like, and that there's a whole chunk of the ship that is very, very, you know, Spartan and gray, and it's because they've gone through so many crew members on these away missions that they've become more, you know, strict or more disciplined, or you know, that kind of idea. So a regular Starfleet officer coming on board might go, wow, what the hell's happened here? You know, just something slightly different.
So what are some of the challenges working on the Star Trek license? Because I can imagine CBS probably holds, not, I wouldn't say a leash, but they expect certain things, whereas BattleTech I might imagine being a little more freeform, obviously follow within their stylistic guidelines and in-universe lore, etc. Is there anything different besides working with a more freeform IP as opposed to something that's very firmly held in the pop culture eye?
You know, believe it or not, I would say that Star Trek has been more freeform for me than BattleTech.
Wow.
And that seems strange. But again, with BattleTech, it's 35 years now of canon that really hasn't changed. And you really have to adhere to the information that's there and all of these books. And there's been so many published. Whereas in Star Trek, while there's still a ton of material, it's canon if it's on screen. So it's easy to just back check the catalog, so to speak. Whereas with BattleTech, some of the books might not have been published for years now. And it's a little more difficult to check that. The other side of it is that at least with Star Trek, since I grew up with it, a lot of the information is just as real life to me in some ways. That, you know, here's how a warp core works. This is how fast the Constitution class is. You know, going down the list, you kind of know these things, so it's not as hard writing for Star Trek for me than it is BattleTech.
That's not something I expected. I always expected Star Trek to be more rigid because, as you said, if it's on the screen, that's how it is. But with BattleTech, things really haven't changed. But it's not to say there isn't room for innovation and whatnot. Speaking of innovation, one of the questions I'd love to ask anybody who's worked in the RPG industry is, obviously you've worked on a couple of different lines, but if contracts were no problem and the world was the perfect universe that we wish it to be, what are some games that you wish you could work on? Or if you could work on a game that maybe has fallen by the wayside, what game would you like to work on?
Okay, well, boy, that's a tough question. I've been asked that before, and I have a problem trying to come up with a good answer of what line I would like to work on. I kind of vary between saying I would love to work on a resurgence of World of Darkness Mage. I don't think I would want to work on Old Mage and rehash it. I would like to work on something that uses the old world and then continues it. That, or I think I would like to write for an Expanse game, because I love the Expanse so much. For a game that I would bring back, that's a much easier question. Crimson Skies. Crimson Skies.
Agreed. That's a game like nobody talks about anymore, which is really unfortunate because the Xbox game was fantastic.
I like the setting. I think the setting is interesting. I don't think it's as fleshed out as some other game settings, but it's interesting at the very least. I like the idea that they used some prototype aircraft that were real-life aircraft in that game as a basis for their strange, weird world. And I honestly liked the combat system. So, I don't know. I'd love to see Crimson Skies brought back.
Now, here's my next question. Do you know who holds the IP?
I think I do. I think it's still... maybe I don't. I probably shouldn't say, because I'd probably be wrong. So, no, I guess I don't.
I was about to say that might be something people should consider for a Kickstarter, because I would think Crimson Skies, because you look at how popular RPGs and board games are on Kickstarter, I'd say they're more successful than not these days. I think that one might actually get funded. I would honestly say so.
And I would also say I would like to see at least something that hasn't been published, but I would like to see a more simple tactical starship game for Star Trek. As much as I enjoy Starfleet battles, I don't like the phone book of rules. I think it's really clunky. I would love to have a simplified version of that, and that's me kind of self-promoting, because I've written a rule set like that. But I would like to see it professionally done. That I would love to see that.
Fantastic. So I guess as we begin to wrap this up, Aaron, what is some advice you can give to people? Because breaking into the RPG industry right now seems like it's never been more accessible than ever. Like, I hear tons of people that are self-publishing. They do stuff for D&D Beyond. They submit stuff to Drive Through RPG. They do stuff with the open game license. How do people get noticed?
Send in your things. If you're passionate about something, just do it. Don't worry about it being perfectly edited or using perfect English. I'm guilty of needing a very good editor at times. Just write your ideas, put it together in a way that people can understand what you're trying to say and trying to get across, and why you and this idea should be considered to be published or be a part of what you're trying to do. Just do it. And you know what? If you're rejected, you're rejected. That's okay. Take the rejection, look at it. Why was I rejected? And do it again. If you're passionate about what you're writing, if you're passionate about the project that you're doing, getting rejected or getting it sent back to you shouldn't matter at all. Just keep working at it. That's it. That's it.
That's fantastic advice. So hopefully you, my friends out there in the Twig universe, if you enjoy tabletop RPGs, take that chance, because right now we're all in self-quarantine. If you've got the time to write. You don't have to know, as Aaron said, you don't have to necessarily know the rules frontwards and backwards. If you're passionate about it and it shows in your writing and in the wit of the material that you are putting forward, then who knows? Maybe you'll get a shot. It never hurts to try. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So, Aaron, once again, I got to thank you for taking time out of your busy day to come speak with us on This Week in Geek. And you've more or less kind of joined us in an unofficial capacity. You're working with us on Future Imperfect. You're going to be joining us on Altered Geek on a more regular basis. And I got to say, I am thrilled to have yet another geek, nerd, or dork, or dweeb on this crew.
I'm happy to be here. As you know, I can talk. So
It is fantastic. All right, guys, that was my interview with Aaron Pollyea. So once again, please check out his stuff. If you want to check out his BattleTech stuff, you can check out Catalyst Game Labs. You can also check out his stuff for Star Trek Adventures via Modiphius's website. Most recently, he's done the Star Trek Delta Quadrant stuff, which is a book I reviewed a couple of weeks ago, which is fantastic. His stuff for the Gamma Quadrant also quite good. If you're into the Dominion War, gives a lot of fresh information in there, which really makes it really exciting for potential Star Trek Adventures campaigns. And perhaps we will do that here on Twig at some point in the future. So guys, until next time, I've been Mike the Birdman Dodd, and I'm probably going to be retiring my sign-off at least for a little while until the whole pandemic passes over. I realize what I say is maybe not the most sensitive thing to be saying right now. So I'm going to quote my friend Jackie Bam Bam from 93.3 WMMR and say, be cool, be kind, be careful. We'll catch you guys next time right here on ThisWeekInGeek.net.
Well, that's our show. All right, here's the deal. Every time you watch my show, I will send you $40.
Checks will not be honored.
You've been listening to This Week in Geek, your source for guaranteed nonsense or your money back. Tune in next week for more info on the most important things you didn't need to know. Check out our website at ThisWeekInGeek.net and subscribe to our podcast through iTunes or any podcatcher. If you'd like to comment on this episode, head over to this episode's post at ThisWeekInGeek.net and leave a comment through Facebook Connect. Follow us on Twitter at ThisWeekInGeek.net and follow our Instagram at twig_official_podcast. Social media not your thing? Send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. We'll see you next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
Just when you think this show is terrible, something wonderful happens.
What?
It ends.
I have to go. Somewhere there is a crime happening.